Dr. Randall, the Soul Doctor, author of Soul Doctoring, Heal Yourself, Heal the Planet, shares her 40 years of experience as a cross-cultural practitioner, medical futurist, and expert in 20 different modalities of healing, along with amazing interviews with some of the leading minds in medicine and big thinkers in all walks of life. The stories of our lives are the woven energies of our soul's paths. They feed and ignite the spiritual light that nourishes the universal soul, the one mind, the cosmic consciousness where we all come together. This podcast is going to be a deep dive into the personal stories of people who have made significant contributions to the planet. What formed them? What moved them to become these leaders and innovators that inspire us so? Hi, Russ. Hi, Todd.
Hi,
Good
Gail.
evening.
How are you? Good
I'm
evening.
so excited. I mean, I'm just so excited. I can't hardly contain myself. I've been trying to get some reputable regenerative farmers on my show for a while. And I have worked with other regenerative farmers in other shows that I've done, but I was so pleased to get you on. And here we are in the same issue of Sustainability Today magazine. So this is, wow, kind of a
Really
coincidence.
fun.
Huh?
Yeah, very
It's
exciting.
really fun.
Yeah, it's totally fun. I mean, I love this. I mean, the work is fun. Just making the planet a better place to be is fun, you know, and the people that I have on this show, I did send you some of that information, are people that are game changers. And I feel you guys are definitely game changers. And anybody in this field is a game changer. And that's why I'm doubly honored and excited. So anyway,
I'll
let's
take
go.
it. It's awesome. That's certainly what we're trying to do. Change the world.
Yeah. And we got to get more and more people aware of it. And I think it's an education issue. And that's why, you know, another reason why I'm just thrilled to have you on. And I'm sure you don't have time, but I do Instagram TVs, and I have a pretty healthy following. And I've been actually the last 4, I kind of built up to it because I wrote a book called Heal Yourself, Heal the Planet, Soul Doctoring, Heal Yourself, Heal the Planet. And I feel once you heal yourself, you can't help but look around and see now what should I do? And you know, you get to regenerative farming. Because you get to the earth and you have to do, you know, what can help the earth and what can put carbon back in the earth. And this is one of the ways. So one of the options, one of the future options. So that's.
Absolutely true. I couldn't agree more. And having that key insight that the health of the people and the health of the planet are intimately connected is really true and fundamental and profoundly important.
Right. I do a talk called the gut planet connection. You know, that's yeah. So Russ, you were a mechanical engineer and an entrepreneur that spent 30 years at Shell. Right. No one would have expected you to come out and do this. So this is kind of cool. But I like that you have all that scientific knowledge, and you say yourself that you spent the first part of your time taking carbon out of the earth, and now you're spending your time putting it back, and that's just lovely. And you're working with other scientists and innovators to come up with techniques to do that. But you got into regenerative farming as a result of that, and I just love that you're the CEO of Standard Soil. And you know, I love talking about soil. You wouldn't think so, but I do. And I love that you guys are, you know, Audubon certified. I've never heard about anybody being Audubon certified. So
hopefully you'll hear it a whole lot more.
Yeah,
that's right.
That's great. And Todd, you know, you're just as amazing. You were the CFO of and a serial founder of many grassland beef businesses, but I think they weren't good enough for you. Sort of is my impression, but you can correct me.
Well, I'm just never satisfied. So I've always wanted to make improvements, and sometimes it's easier to sell a business and start a new one than it is to try to fix the old one.
Yeah, for sure. I like that. I'm a fixer, but I'm both. I feel strongly both ways. Anyway, you started the first grass-fed beef brands back in 2003. I didn't even know I knew grass-fed existed, but I didn't know regenerative. Well, when did regenerative farming come?
Well, regenerative farming goes back millennia because it's really part of tradition. So it's just if what's old is new again.
So when did the modern day?
We started calling it regenerative ag, I don't know, in the last 5 years. That's not it. It really doesn't matter what we call it. What matters is what it does.
And what we do about it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think very similar to your story. There was a point in time when I started to connect how I felt with what I ate and how what I ate was raised. Mm-hmm. And it was like an awakening to the importance of getting all of this right. Mm-hmm. It became more important to me to get this right and to try to help other people get it right than anything else I could do with my life.
Awesome. So you're on your soul path, I would call it. And
I would agree.
And This is your purpose, and that's why you're happy.
that's exactly. You can hear it in my voice.
Well, you pretty much said what I was going to say. When did you get involved with the Blue Nest?
We started planning for Blue Nest in 2018. We shipped our first beef subscription boxes in November of 2019. Mm-hmm. And that came about because of some incredibly good work that the Audubon Society has been doing since 2015 or so. So you and your listeners may not be aware, but over 53% of the grassland birds that existed in 1970 are gone. And these are grassland birds, mean birds that make their nest on the ground. They will not build a nest in a tree. And the reason that they're gone, based on some research, and it's just common sense, is loss of habitat. So most of what used to be grassland in the United States has either been plowed up to grow probably corn and soybeans or wheat, or it's been overgrazed by cattle that when we put a fence around them, their grazing behavior doesn't model. It is not the same way that bison grazed when there were no fences. So both of those things create either short grass, like the golf course putting green, or no grass at all because it's been tilled up into a field. Mm-hmm. That means that there's no place for those birds to make a nest, rear their young, and so we're losing those birds. Audubon decided, I would imagine that the chemicals probably does something to kill them. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it does. And Russ makes a great point. This is since the Silent Spring book by Rachel Carson was written. Mm-hmm. This has all happened since the first Earth Day. So this isn't something that happened before we had any idea we were harming the environment. This is all, we've lost 53% of these grassland birds since we started to pay attention. So everything we're doing isn't working. Right. We're still losing these birds. So Audubon decided to go out and find the ranchers who cared about birds as well as cattle, teach them a different way to manage their cattle. Same land, same acres, same cattle, different management. And instead of letting them eat all the grass down to the dirt, we move the cattle when they've eaten half the grass. Now, surprisingly, the cattle actually gain more weight when you do that because all the nutrition for the cattle is in the top half of the grass. It's in the leaves and the very top of the plant, not in the stem. So when you move the cattle and leave the stems behind, the birds have habitat, the water is cleaner, there's no erosion, and ironically, the cattle gain more weight, even though you're leaving some of it behind. The hardest thing about this is that I grew up on a farm. It is just beaten into us at a young age as farm kids that we need to harvest all of it. And so it is painful to a rancher to move their cattle to a new pasture while there's still something green and standing in the pasture that the cattle are in. Well, doesn't it grow back, and isn't it more robust because of the cattle themselves? Absolutely right. That's absolutely right. But the psychology of not wasting anything is hard to overcome. So Audubon started teaching these ranchers, listen, if you just change the way you graze your cattle and move them when they've eaten half the grass, trust me, you're going to love this. Your cattle will gain more weight. And when that grass regrows and you come back and graze it again, there's going to be more grass there, and it's going to be of higher quality because of the way that grass plant responds to grazing in the rest period. So what we want to do is we want to make our cattle interact with their environment in the same way that the wild bison herds interacted with their environment.
Exactly.
And we can do that now. There was some key technology that we needed to develop. One was the ability to make portable electric fences. And those electric fences allow us to put all of our cattle in a small part of the pasture for a short period of time. And then we can let that space that they were yesterday rest for 30 or 60 or 90 or 365 days, depending on how much rain we get and how long it takes for that grass to grow back. And when we do that, yes, we save birds, and there's all kinds of birds nesting. We have scientific studies to show that, which Russell talked about. But the quality of the beef goes up dramatically. The cattle gain more weight. They're healthier. In my opinion, they're happier. But you can tell when you eat the meat from those animals that they were managed in a fundamentally different way than cattle that are grazed using what we now call traditional grazing, even though it isn't traditional. It's very hard to put those labels on and have
right.
the right thing. Because what we're really trying to do is to create an interaction where the cattle mimic the way the bison used to graze.
Exactly.
And
so Russ, maybe you can tell me, what does that do to the soil?
Yeah, think of it as, we're rediscovering this ancient wisdom, like Todd said. It's more than millennia. It's many, many millennia, right? So that the indigenous peoples in North America had this deep, deep respect for grazing ruminants like the bison, right? And what happens when you mimic that behavior? You have these dense herds eating a lot, moving frequently, not coming back to the same place too often. Not only is the grass regrowing, but what's happening is the grass, as it grows, shares some of the carbon that it takes out of the air with the microbes in the soil. And what that does is feed an underground, what I call a barter economy, where the plant pays for nutrients by giving the microbes sugars, and then the microbes bring back calcium, phosphorus, and all the nutrients they need to grow. And so this improves that soil health, and that's what allows you to have even more grass the next time you come back. That has the net effect, all those organic chemicals anchored in sugars and complex compounds, those are carbon-rich chemicals. So effectively what you're doing is taking carbon out of the air where it's a liability and putting it back to work in the process of growing life by feeding that microbiology in the ground. And I think you've mentioned before microbiome stuff. I mean, really, there's been a lot of appreciation for the important role of the human microbiome on our own personal health in just the last 5 to 10 years, really, right? And in the same way, we used to think of dirt kind of like this inert mechanism that held up a plant, and you threw chemicals at it. What we now appreciate is that healthy process of graze, rest, regraze is really stimulating that microbiome in the soil in a way that improves the health of that. If you think of the soil as kind of the lining of the intestine of the earth, if you will,
exactly,
like in the gut, you're getting in this system that feeds on itself and helps the whole system prosper more and more.
Right. I think that's part of why we have so much gut disease right now in humans, is we don't have microbiome in our soil, in the industrial raised food. When you take a handful of earth from an industrial raised farm, there's no microbes in there. When you take it from your land, it's got more microorganisms than people ever existed on the planet. I mean,
that's right.
Just so right. If people could wrap their minds around that,
It is. It's really complicated to wrap your mind around it. Once you see it, once you experience it, it's just powerfully real, right? But and it's humbling. to recognize this first, several inches of topsoil has so much life in it. And it really acts as the interface between the organic world of life and the inorganic world of sunshine and chemical compounds and all this stuff. It all happens in that first few feet of soil where inorganic life and organic life feed each other in a way that allows both to, come out ahead. So it's such a miracle. It's so interesting. As someone trained as an engineer, I understand it and marvel at it from the principle of physics, and it's just so much more interesting because there's so much going on as a living, breathing organism that is it's not true in an engine in your car, right?
Right.
You put in fuel and the car moves after you light it on fire in a controlled environment. But biology and nature is so much more complicated, and when it's working, back to the bird thing, it's really complicated to understand. You can get out a microscope and you can identify the microbes and you can run chemical tests and you can understand what's going on. But for the average everyday person, all you got to do is walk out into regenerative pasture and you'll notice the birds and the butterflies and the bees. They'll be back, right? They're effectively, life itself is the judge that life is functioning. You don't need a microscope to be able to tell you're in a regenerative pasture. If you go out into a conventional industrial pasture, it's like you said, fairly sterile and it's quite a different experience. And so this is one of the really nice things about working with Audubon is the bird. Some people like to say the meadowlark is the canary of the prairie. It really is an indicative thing that the prairie grassland ecosystem is working well. But all that other stuff that's going on there is incredibly scientifically interesting and it's relevant to our own health. It's just that it gets so much simpler when we can understand that the bird is both treasure, i.e. it's a conservation goal that's legitimate in its own right, this 53% loss in 50 years that Todd mentioned, but it's also indicative of all these other wonderful things that are happening in health.
What was it the miners used to take down in the
canaries, right? Yeah. They take a canary, and then what the canary in the coal mine was to detect methane. And basically, when the canary would detect methane, you'd better get out of the mine,
right?
It might explode, right?
Right.
Or you'd asphyxiate. So
when the birds go, that's not a good sign.
Exactly.
Right.
And that was the whole premise of Silent Spring, as Todd pointed to Rachel Carson's book, right? And it led to us making certain chemicals like DDT illegal. But in a lot of ways, we traded out those really bad chemicals for just kind of bad chemicals, right? We've still continued to lose all this life from our ecosystems. And regenerative agriculture at its core is basically a system of producing food in a way that allows us to grow even more and better food. So instead of like compromising and like how you're trying to minimize how much we degrade the environment, when you work with the natural ecosystems like Todd described here with trying to mimic things like, in our case, roaming bison herds, you're actually enhancing the capacity of that ecosystem to produce even more. And to me, it's kind of like, I tell people, it's kind of like the old Willy Wonka everlasting gobstopper, except instead of never getting smaller, it actually gets bigger. Is that when you treat life in a way that's respectful, that's understanding, that recognizes the whole systems, more life flows into the space. And in our case, that means more productivity and healthier food and an increased capacity to grow even more healthier food.
Right. Yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit. But first, I want to ask you, do you give your animals any chemicals or antibiotics?
Personally, no, I don't. I've learned over many years that it's far better to learn how to eliminate the need for a tool than to simply have the marketplace deprive you of that tool. So antibiotics, for example, it's very difficult to raise cattle in confinement on a high grain diet without the use of antibiotics, because the combination of the environment and the diet suppress the immune system so dramatically that cattle are going to get sick.
Mm-hmm.
And just removing the antibiotics is not a solution.
No.
Having sick cattle is not any better than having cattle that have been fed antibiotics every day. The goal is to have cattle that have a vibrant, healthy immune system. Now, because I grew up on the kind of farm where all of our cattle were in a feedlot, I did not know until I was in my late 20s that cattle could be healthy. It had never occurred to me. I believed, because of my experience, all of my experience with cattle was that they were sickly, that they were always getting sick, and you were having to constantly look for the ones that were sick, pull them out, treat them, and then look for the next group that was going to get sick. When I started
living like they were supposed to be.
Exactly.
When I started raising cattle on pasture, I just kept looking for the ones that were going to get sick, and they didn't get sick.
Right. Do you get any pressure from Big Pharma? Because as I understand it, the most antibiotics that they make are for cattle. And they're not anxious to stop doing that, but No,
of course not. I mean, they have a business model that is based on them selling more of their products to people every year, to farmers and ranchers.
And then we need them because
right, exactly. So
it screws up our immune system because it screws up our gut.
But I don't subscribe to that either, that there's anybody that's evil or malicious about that. There is a business there are people that they make their money, they feed their families by selling antibiotics. I have a lot of friends who make their living by feeding cattle in a feedlot and trying to keep them alive and long enough to get them to the processing plant, and that's how they feed their families. And I respect the fact that that's how they feed their families.
Yeah.
However, I've learned a different way. The way I always explain it is, what do you want to do when you wake up in the morning? Personally, I love being around cattle, but I do not love being around cattle in a feedlot. I want to wake up in the morning and I want to be with cattle that are outside on a pasture eating grass or hay, that are healthy and happy and content. Mm-hmm. And that I know when I take them to the processing plant and I turn them into beef, the end product is gonna create raving fans. I'm going to nourish people with the beef from these animals, and they're going to be so thrilled. Their bodies are going to be so thrilled because they were finally fed something that was nourishing. Mm-hmm. If I don't believe that anybody wakes up in the morning and wants to go deal with sick cattle in a feedlot. They just don't know any different.
Right. But it sounds like you've gotten to a lot of these guys, and you're teaching them.
Yes. I've spent the last 20 years of my life teaching other ranchers that they don't need all these crutches that we think we need, mm-hmm. antibiotics and feeding grain, in order to produce an amazing eating experience. But that's still a tiny, tiny part of the whole beef industry.
Right.
What's going to change it is when we finally get enough consumers that buy expensive grass-fed beef this way, mm-hmm. and we can produce beef, the grass-fed beef, at the same scale that a feedlot produces it, it'll be the same cost.
Well, that's what I tell my patients. Vote with your dollar.
That's exactly right.
They say, Dr. Randall, I can't afford that. I say, you can't not afford it. It's right. The same thing we went through with organic food. Now they're buying the Correct. Organic food, and look, it's everywhere. Yep. It's in Costco.
That's right.
So we can do the same thing with this. We just have to keep educating.
That's exactly right. And that's why we're starting with a direct-to-consumer business. We're not selling to grocery stores. We need to find a small group of consumers that are passionate about birds and the environment and animal welfare and happy cattle and healed ecosystems, and making sure that their money is going directly to the ranchers who also care about those things. Mm-hmm. And they're eating the very best beef they've ever eaten in their life.
Right.
Now, someday, if enough people vote with their dollars, this will become the standard way of raising cattle. That's what I want to see happen.
Me too.
I'm not a fan of legislating a business out of existence. I don't go and lobby the government to shut down feedlots or to prevent selling antibiotics to sick animals who need them to stay alive. What I'm a fan of is creating a better system that produces better food more abundantly at a lower cost, and makes the need for some of those things that I don't appreciate, the need just goes away.
So is that possible?
Absolutely, it's possible.
Yeah, it's absolutely possible. We just have to start with, it's a long journey, right? So I'm here in Texas where we just went through this period of blackouts and power grid failures, and a lot of people were trying to blame it on renewable energy, but it's just not there. In reality, we've lost a lot of coal plants because we got a lot of wind and solar plants that have made those coal plants obsolete now. We're already in the position in things like the automotive industry where you've got electric vehicles that are going to make gasoline engines obsolete. Well, we think in the long run, by starting with a premium product for people that are thoughtful and can understand, you either pay me now or pay me later, they can kind of get that bigger picture. We start there. Over time, once we can get the kind of scale that the industrial agriculture system has, then indeed we can be economically competitive. But it's a long-term game, right? So the first solar panels were expensive. The first electric cars are expensive.
Yeah.
So these things take time to work through. But with persistence that's what we try to do as entrepreneurs, is build a business that can get us from where we are to where we want to be.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know you don't like to say bad things about other businesses, but the amount of carbon that is produced on the planet is not, vastly from growing the food to feed the cattle in the feedlots.
Well, first, to be clear, the biggest chunk of carbon going out into the atmosphere from Earth, from our civilization, is from guys like me in my former world. And I guess all of us as consumers, every time we fly an airplane or drive our car.
The carbon emissions from machines and airplanes and trains and cars is far less than the grain that is grown to feed the cattle in the feedlots. It's been measured. Yeah,
there's quite a bit of confusion in that space for a lot of folks, and I've seen people try to slice it differently. The feedlot and agriculture is definitely a significant factor, and
the grain that's grown to feed them.
The biggest thing. I mean, this is one of the challenges associated with even some of the other alternative proteins and meats that people are developing. They still all require that someone grows some kind of input, a grain and carbohydrate product to feed these systems. We like to say it's not the cow, it's the how. It's the real problem with the feedlot is not the cow itself, it's that process, the how of how that feedlot works, that takes in the grain and carbohydrate and feeds it in that confinement operation. You got all the sick animals, like Todd pointed out. You got the runoff.
It's the tilling of the land.
It is a killing of the land. It's a slow and painful death of the land. And yet the paradox, the irony is that the opportunity in front of us with regenerative agriculture is not just to make the growing and producing of food less bad, but we can actually turn that arrow around the other way. We can turn that carbon arrow into such a thing that we create ecosystems that are net sinks of carbon on the planet instead of just smaller emitters.
I love that.
And there's roughly 3 times as much carbon in the top 2 meters of soil as there is in the entire atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
So you really don't have to take a lot out of the atmosphere. You still got a lot of room to store it in the soil. Now it's really complicated how to do that and how to measure that and how fast we can do it.
We have a carbon debt, but do you guys add to your regenerative farms? Do you do agroforestry and raise of other crops? I mean, a lot of regenerative farmers do.
Yeah, a lot of regenerative farmers do. In our ecosystem right now, we're concentrated primarily in the central flyway of the United States. This is where those grassland birds from the Great Plains, from basically Montana and the Dakotas down here to where I am along the coast of Texas. And in that region, there are places where trees are a part of the natural habitat, but it's different than if you go further east where you get these integrated forest and grassland savannas.
Yeah. Around first.
Yeah, no. So, I mean, trees belong. One of the it's hard things to communicate to people is what we really want to do as humans is steward the planet to thrive the best it can, given where it's at, right? So,
right. Biomimicry, right? All the way around.
Mississippi and different than New York. And grazers are a tool in that process. What grazing animals do, ruminants specifically, they've got this four stomachs thing that you've probably heard of. That first stomach, the rumen, takes complex carbohydrates that are hard for you and I to break down, but it's energy that's been caught by the sun, and microbes in there munch that down and make that nutrition available to the animal in a way that you and I can't get it. Effectively, what they're doing is upgrading biomass to make it available in the ecological food system. And then, how they do that in a forest, in a mountain, in a prairie, in a whatever can be, different horses for courses. One of the things we've started doing, we just included our chicken from our friends at Regeneration Farms in our product lineup.
Nice.
And they call it tree range chicken. And a lot of people don't think of it, but chickens are not, they didn't evolve to live in open grasslands. They evolved in forests where the canopy provides protection from predators, and there's food sources abundant under the canopy of trees. So we do have that tree part in our portfolio with the chicken production. That's very exciting and, helps us expand that footprint because, again, all of it's about that regeneration part.
Nice.
Well, most of the Audubon certified ranches are in an environment that doesn't naturally grow trees. And so every rancher there would love to have more trees. But it's very hard to get trees to grow there because that's not what nature really wants. What nature wants is what nature grows is whatever plants are best suited to capturing solar energy and efficiently turning it into more carbon in the soil effectively. And the large grassland regions in the center of the United States are optimized biologically for grasses, not for trees. But if you go and look where all of the homesteads are, both the ones that are currently occupied and the ones that are abandoned, they're all in the isolated little places that had a place where water was able to collect enough to grow some trees.
Right.
Trees are incredibly, they're just priceless in the Great Plains because trees block the wind. They provide shade. They provide water and some biodiversity. So we love trees, but most trees need a certain amount of rainfall to grow. Grasses can survive in places that get very little rainfall, whereas trees need access to more water. So what we want to do is we want to try to help nature to grow what wants to grow. One definition of modern farming is that you wake up in the morning and you go out to kill what wants to live, and you try to desperately keep alive what wants to die, because you're trying to grow a plant that doesn't really fit well in that environment. And nature's trying to kill it because it's not the best tool for keeping the soil covered and for collecting solar energy. And farming is hard work when you're constantly trying to kill what wants to grow and keep alive what wants to die. It's a lot more fun when you go out, when you wake up in the morning and you just get to encourage what already wants to grow better.
Yes.
And that's why I don't like to get sucked into negative conversations about this. One is because it just doesn't feel right to me. The point is to figure out how to work with nature. That's a positive game.
Yeah.
Instead of point fingers at the people who I think aren't doing a very good job at working with nature. That's not going to accomplish anything because that's not how we change human behavior. I guarantee you that everybody that's a farmer or rancher would rather have my life than their life if they knew what I knew and if they were confident they can make a living doing it.
Oh, I agree with you 100%. I'm a positive thinker, but sometimes we need to point out the things that are happening for people to can turn their sacred arrow in the right direction.
That's right. But what really changes things, I don't want you to buy our beef because you're mad that farmers are ruining the earth. I want you to buy our beef because it's the most incredible thing you've ever eaten. And every time you eat it, you feel amazing.
Yeah.
You feel like you were just nourished in a way that nothing else does.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited because I'm from Nebraska.
You are? Oh, terrific.
And
Where in Nebraska?
I'm from Omaha.
My goodness.
I'm a horse girl, and I stopped eating beef. I grew up on beef that was not feedlot.
Yeah.
That's how long ago, right? We just got it from the guy next door, and we'd put half of it in this big, gigantic freezers, and then the feedlots moved in, and it became a totally different thing. And my father actually told me a story about working there. He said he had to burn his clothes, and he was just appalled. And I went to look at these animals, and I was appalled, and I stopped eating it. And so I'm glad that, people like you exist, and we can get a product like we used to have, back in the day.
Gail, I'm with you. In fact, it's funny, Todd's smiling because I grew up in Omaha as well.
Oh, wow.
Sure, it's a big enough city, but a small enough town that we all know the corners of it. But it's the same thing. I had no idea. I thought that the pinnacle of human achievement was a feedlot, and I just prayed for days when the wind didn't blow from the south. So
right.
And but now, having been working in this regenerative agriculture industry, to realize that we have this massive opportunity to eat more nourishing food while we heal the planet and heal ourselves at the same time, and restore this living abundance to Earth. It's like this compromise we were making with nature was just like, what the heck were we thinking, right? When you look back at it. And now that we know better, very much like what Todd just said, and so sharing that positive news of a better way that we can bring other people into. And what's really good here with food, because everybody eats, right, is everybody makes a choice every time they open their pocketbook to buy food on what kind of healthy earth they want. And if they choose to look for food that's been produced in a way that helps heal the earth, then they're likely to get healthy as well, while they're really that's the missing link for us to do this. If people don't think about their health and all they care about is what's the cheapest today, then we're going to get more soil running down the rivers. We're going to get more toxins in those rivers. We're going to keep losing birds, and we're going to keep having sicker people.
And poisoning the oceans as well with all.
Yep.
Right.
It's absolutely true.
Yeah.
Right. One of the most inspiring things that this whole conversation is easy. It's easy to let other people polarize it for us. And I just constantly, in my mind, refer back to Maya Angelou's quote: do as best as you can. And when you know better, do better.
Right.
We don't change anybody by starting the conversation by saying you're screwing up.
Mm-hmm.
You're doing it wrong. We change behavior when we say, I see you working really hard, and I see you doing the best that you can. Would you be interested in learning about some of the things, the way that I do something similar? I raise cattle too, and maybe we can compare notes.
Beautiful.
It's just a more, it's just a more compassionate, and it's a more productive way of changing.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a single coal plant in the United States that shut down because people didn't like them anymore. They shut down because renewable energy and other forms of energy made them not cost competitive anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Feedlots will cease to exist when we can produce grass-fed beef cheaper than a feedlot. And all we need to do, we have everything we need. We have the technology, we have the cattle genetics, we have the understanding about grasses. The only thing we need is scale. And it's exactly the same spot that Russ tells me anyway, that solar energy was in 30 years ago. The technology existed. Now we'll continue to refine our management practices and our technology, just like solar panels have been refined. But there will come a point in time when I can produce a pound of grass-fed beef cheaper than a feedlot can produce it. That is inevitable, because I am working with nature instead of against nature. And when that happens, the whole game changes.
Yeah, and it's cheaper for the planet because it's good for the planet, and it's cheaper for the person because you're not going to have the same health problems. But
absolutely.
But I have a challenging question for you both, and I know you've probably thought of it. And do we have enough land?
Oh, that's a great one. And you're absolutely not the first person that's thought about this. And the answer is interesting. If we use traditional grazing methods where we overgraze our pastures, no, we do not have enough land.
Mm-hmm.
Because that kind of management produces, let's say on average, 250 pounds of beef for an acre of pasture per year, was what it can support. With our management, we have years and years of data that show that every single time somebody adapts what we call adaptive multi-paddock grazing. That means we put all the cattle in a small space, we let them eat half the grass, then we move them. And we don't let them come back to that same place until it's fully regrown.
Mm-hmm.
When we do that, within 5 years, that same acre can support at least 4 times as many cattle as the traditional grazing. I've done the math, and we could support the entire United States beef herd just in the state of Nebraska if we managed 100% of that state, if we put it all in grass and managed all of it using our type of management.
Well, that's a phenomenal fact to understand.
It's not a problem, as most things are. It's not a problem of resource limitation. It's a problem of our thinking limitation.
Right. Well, I did some research before I spoke to you guys, because me in my field, I'm a integrative doctor. I have 5 board certifications. I do holistic health, even though I'm an internist gastroenterologist, but I'm board certified in integrative medicine and functional medicine. So I'm very keen on what hurts people, and what hurts people is inflammation.
Yes.
And I would say the most inflammation comes from industrial raised meat, beef, and it causes high levels of inflammatory factors in your bloodstream, causes an elevation in your CRP, coats your red cells, and damages your endothelium. So I said, okay, well, what about regenerative beef? And I looked it up, I studied it, and it turns out, you probably already know this, but I was happy to find out that there are far less, if any, inflammatory cytokines in regeneratively raised beef. And not only that because they're eating the food that is so high in phytochemicals and omega-3s, the grasses, it's actually anti-inflammatory. So
that's correct.
I was very happy to hear about that. But I also think we need to think about our predecessors, our ancestors. We don't have to eat gobs of meat a day. We could reduce it a little bit, make it 3 or 4 ounces, like probably our ancestors did. Sure, the buffalo came every year, but how much did they have to eat during the rest of the year, right?
Yeah, it was certainly variable. The way I like to think of it is that if we fix the problem with better meat, we bring in meat that's been produced in a way that's harmonious with the health of the planet, the more or less problem will be self-equilibrating. Every time I've done the math as well, there's ample space that we could really produce a heck of a lot of beef, but that doesn't necessarily mean we have to eat a heck of a lot of beef.
Well, that's happy, but we need the beef to improve the grassland. I mean, we got to have them to their hooves and working their byproducts, their excrement, whatever, into the land. That's what does it.
Yeah, that's a part of it as well. The animals are participating in nutrient cycling. What you and I call manure is a nutrient-rich system. All you got to do is step into a pasture and see where the manure has been, and you'll see the rich areas of growth. And that's because the nutrients are going back to work instead of going off to a feedlot where they're running down a river and contaminating the river and the streams and the oceans. So again, once we get all those systems healthy again, we get caught up in these big questions of should we more, should we less? If we eat better, the more or less will take care of itself. And even, I'm real excited to hear you talking about the inflammatory nature of foods, because there's, I think we've learned a lot about what makes healthy food in the last few decades. But I think we have to have a sense of humility that there's a whole lot of complexity in food, like the phytochemicals, like you talked about, that, we're just beginning to appreciate how they all work together to create health. What we can say is when meat has been produced in a way that, honors, respects, and works with that natural ecosystem, that stuff's all going to be in balance. And it's going to show up as, a sense of nourishment and a sense of health in us, but it's because it was produced in a way that was healthy for the environment.
And not only that, but energetically, we're not eating our own misery, as I call it. It's happy.
Exactly right.
Eating our own misery. Indeed, I think we're eating our way back to abundance. I'll save the long rabbit hole, but really what we're doing when we're growing food in a way that allows us to grow more food is we're helping the planet do what it wants to do, which is capture more and more of that incoming. The only real energy source on planet Earth is sunshine, notwithstanding the nuclear equivalent of the mass that's here. And the better we get at capturing that sunshine in something that's growing, the better off we'll be. I'll give you a little tiny factoid I did several years ago. If you add up all the solar energy that falls on bare soil in just the United States, when the land is fallow between planting seasons, the amount of energy that could have been captured in a growing plant that wasn't there, what I call the It's a Wonderful Life thing, right? Jim Stewart, that amount of energy is roughly equivalent to all the coal, oil, and natural gas produced in this country every year combined.
Wow.
So in other words, we are wasting as much solar energy that could have been caught in growing life as all the energy we're producing from fossil fuels. It's remarkable how much abundance there is in life if we just turn it back on again.
Right. We need plants.
Growing plants. That's what catches sunshine. And then us as part of the animal kingdom, we participate in the cycling of that energy. Right? They're supposed to be in balance. They're supposed to work together. But when you break it, and basically what we've been doing, again, guys like me, digging up carbon, plant energy from millions and hundreds of millions of years ago, and emitting it into the atmosphere, we've broken that balance, right? And now what we have here with regenerative agriculture is an opportunity to bring that back into balance by changing the way we grow food.
Yay. I love it. Well, you guys are just amazing. I love what you're doing. I'm totally with you, and I'm on board, and I'm going to keep educating from my end too. So,
well, it all fits together, and it's a virtuous cycle. When you change your diet, your thinking gets more clear. And I believe, I don't have any proof for this, but I believe that you can begin to get access to other forms of wisdom that you just can't get because your whole body's devitalized and malnourished. Even if you're obese, you're malnourished. And in order to have all of my senses functional, and some of those senses are spiritual senses, I need to be nourished well.
Yes.
If I'm not nourished well, I can't sense the things that I should be able to sense. So when you start that process, it's a virtuous cycle that just things get better and better. You're able to intuit wisdom that you couldn't have accessed before.
Perfect.
And that wisdom reinforces that you're doing a good job at feeding yourself nourishing foods, which just keeps that virtuous cycle going.
Agree.
Me too. So, do you guys have any words of wisdom to leave us with, or things
I think there's so much hope, and I think the consumers are the everyday person holds the keys here.
Mm-hmm.
They really do. The choices that we make can make all the difference. And so if people can just be thoughtful when they choose what they eat, and importantly, more than the noun, I like to say, think about the verb, think about the process that was used to create that food, and one that helped heal the environment or degrade the environment, because it's going to pretty much go along with that, whether it's going to heal or degrade your own health. So I think it's an incredibly, regenerative agriculture is a very empowering opportunity for consumers. There's a lot of things that are wrong with government, a lot of things we'd like to change, but we don't have to. All we need is consumers who wake up in the morning and choose to participate in a different kind of economy. And if they do that, over time, we're making good progress. Over time, we'll make the old system obsolete by just making a better system to take over.
Yes, I agree. Todd?
Oh, I think Russ said it really well.
Okay, he did.
He did. Yeah. There's nothing else.
Do you guys have I don't know what to hand out, cards, postcards, something like I could put in my office for people to pick up, and brochures or something?
Because we're an e-commerce business, and because we started just barely before COVID, we haven't had an opportunity to do very much in-person marketing. So we could print something up for you. We'd be happy to have you display some of that in your office and share that with your patients.
Because I there isn't a patient I see that doesn't come up, I think, because I'm always guiding them for their diet, for their health, and it's just part of it.
Great. We've got a little bit of printed materials that we can get to you, Doctor. And
awesome. All right. So why don't you give out your information where my listeners can find you and get involved? And also, I want to ask you, I have one more question. Does the regenerative farming industry have a group, like not a club, but an association or something?
It's a great question. No.
No.
There's a lot of, that's a whole nother hour-long topic, is about how do you know that what you're eating is really regenerative? But you'll have to have us on again. But that's the whole point of an association, is to verify and validate and certify that this is really regenerative. So, we chose to work with Audubon because we felt strongly that they had a really robust and effective way to certify the ranchers who were doing good, versus the ones who were just average.
Great.
And so that's part of it. But there's no standardized definition of regenerative. It will absolutely be co-opted by large companies. You will see lots of food that's wrapped in a regenerative label that isn't necessarily regenerative. The test is how do you feel when you eat it?
And meanwhile, what we do have are associations that are dominantly farmer to farmer, learning from each other, teaching each other on how to make this work on your land. So Todd and I happen to be
perfect.
Chair and vice chair of an organization called the Grass-Fed Exchange. It's an annual conference, and we're doing some virtual things here lately that brings together the leading practitioners to compare notes with one another, learn, and move forward. There are a number of other similar and associations and groups that are working together to advance the overall cause: Acres, the Quivira Coalition, the Savory Institute, and various certification schemes. And, we're all trying to learn together to kind of move the needle in the right direction.
Great.
The Grass-Fed Exchange is primarily focused on the meat industries, so beef, lamb, pork, chicken, and these things. So regeneration in that context, and is very practitioner focused. And like I said, it's very, very focused on farmer to farmer education, on how to raise our own collective gains in doing this. So,
well, that's just perfect. So tell people how they can find you, get your product, and that kind of thing, and then stay on for a second because I want to give you my information.
Okay, great. So real easy. Just go to bluenestbeef.com. We're an online-only business. You click on a magic yellow button for whatever you want to order, and a box magically shows up on your doorstep of beef or beef and chicken or just chicken, whatever your preference is. So we've tried to make it real easy. One of the things we like to say that one of my advisors and mentors has taught me is make the right thing the easy thing, and it's more likely to happen. So what we tried to do with Blue Nest Beef here is create something that really simplifies all this complication of regenerative agriculture. Trust the birds, trust Audubon. They've been around. They know what healthy ecosystems look like. And then we focus as Blue Nest Beef on taking beef that's been produced by these ranchers that are doing awesome things for birds, processing, packaging, and just making it magically show up on your doorstep, and then you can enjoy every bite.
Lovely. Thank you so much.
Our privilege.
Okay. Yes. Thank you for having us. You've been a delightful host. It's so nice to talk to someone who has a sense of intuition about how all the puzzle pieces are supposed to fit together.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. Okay. I love you guys. I love what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
This is Dr. Gail Randall from Soul Stories, and author of Soul Doctoring, Heal Yourself, Heal the Planet. I want to thank Saltology, our sponsor, at bathsalt.com, which fits perfectly into my medicine bag as it, like me, calls upon the ancient wisdom and modern technology to heal, especially with the stresses and ills of our modern times. The Bokek brand uses organic salts combined with organic essential oils sourced from ancient Egypt to provide a perfect remedy for your bathing ritual and healing from modern stresses. The Relief RX brand is a unique one-of-a-kind healing salt that uses organic CBD, treated with a unique emulsification process to create nanoparticles which easily enter the skin to most effectively heal and relieve aching muscles and joints. Whether from chronic inflammation or just a rough workout, this is the perfect healing bath, especially when you add the organic essential oils of neroli, lavender, eucalyptus, or grapefruit. Your body, mind, and soul will be lifted and soothed like never before. Go now to bathsalt.com. I also want to give special thanks to Larry Antonino and Agora Borealis Recording Studio for music and score, and also to closetotheearth.com for IT and computer assistance.